13 stab wounds, 1 kitchen knife, a staged suicide, and a teenage killer who almost got away with it all. It was a calm, spring morning in Calne, Wiltshire, the kind where sunlight filters through scattered clouds, promising a peaceful day ahead. Ellie Gould, a 17-year-old with dreams as bright as her smile, was getting ready for school. May 3rd, 2019, should have been just another day in her life, but by noon, her absence from class had sparked quiet concern among friends. By evening, her name would haunt headlines, synonymous with tragedy. Why did Ellie, vibrant and full of ambition, suddenly decide not to go to school? Why was she later discovered lifeless in her own kitchen, her blood soaking the floor? Most terrifyingly, how could someone she trusted unleash such horrifying brutality? These questions would unravel a mystery that left even seasoned detectives shaken. At 3:00 p.m., Ellie's father, Matt Gould, returned home from work. The house, usually filled with warmth and laughter, was eerily silent. Calling out for Ellie, he walked into the kitchen and froze. There she was, lying face down on the cold floor, surrounded by a sea of blood. A knife jutted grotesquely from her neck, her lifeless hands clutching its handle as if frozen in time. The scene was unspeakable. The walls bore streaks of blood, remnants of a savage struggle. Matt, overwhelmed by disbelief, stepped closer, praying it was some horrible mistake. But as his trembling hand touched her cold body, reality hit like a storm. His beloved daughter, his Ellie, was gone. Frantic, he called emergency services, his voice trembling as he described the horror before him. The operator, trying to guide him through CPR, likely knew it was too late. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed the unthinkable. Ellie had been dead for hours. Her life, so full of promise, had been stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty. Medical examiners later revealed the horrifying extent of her injuries. 13 stab wounds concentrated around her neck. This was no heat-of-the-moment act. It was deliberate, calculated. Defensive wounds on Ellie's hands told of her desperate fight, her final moments spent battling a merciless attacker. But one detail was especially chilling. The knife, deliberately lodged in her neck, as if to stage the scene. Who could commit such an atrocity? Ellie was known for her kindness and warmth. Her family had no enemies. Yet someone had crossed the threshold of their peaceful home and turned it into a place of terror. As police officers secured the crime scene, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, fear gripping the quiet town. Detectives quickly ruled out randomness. The sheer violence of the attack suggested something deeply personal. But what could drive such rage? What secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of Ellie's seemingly perfect life? As investigators sifted through the evidence, they knew this case wouldn't be simple. To find justice for Ellie, they would need to untangle the threads of her life, uncover the truth she carried, and confront the darkness lurking in the shadows of her world. The investigation into Ellie Gould's murder began with one pressing question: who could have taken her life so viciously, and why? As detectives worked through the Gould family home, the evidence painted a grim and harrowing picture. Blood spatter across the kitchen walls revealed a savage and relentless attack. The scene was chaotic but carried deliberate elements, details that left even experienced investigators deeply disturbed. Matt and Carol Gould, Ellie's parents, were brought in for questioning, not as suspects, but as the people who knew her best. In the sterile interview room, their grief was palpable. Their voices were low, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. When asked if Ellie had any enemies or if anyone might want to harm her, they exchanged a weighted glance before uttering a single name: Thomas Griffiths. Thomas wasn't a stranger. He was Ellie's ex-boyfriend, a classmate at Harden Hewish School in Chippenham. Their relationship, which began just a few months earlier, had seemed innocent enough at first. But her parents had noticed troubling signs. Thomas was quiet, almost brooding, a stark contrast to Ellie's lively and outgoing personality. Over time, they watched their daughter change. She seemed withdrawn, distracted, her usual spark dimmed. Whenever her parents asked if something was wrong, Ellie brushed off their concerns, insisting everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Not even close. Ellie's friends revealed a side of the relationship her parents hadn't seen. Thomas had become controlling and possessive, demanding her attention constantly. When Ellie didn't reply to his texts quickly enough, he would lash out, accusing her of not caring. He hadn't shown any physical violence before, but his emotional manipulation was enough to leave Ellie uneasy. The breaking point came on May 2, 2019, just one day before her murder. Ellie decided to end the relationship. She told friends she couldn't handle his behavior anymore and needed to focus on her exams and future. The breakup wasn't mutual. Thomas begged her to reconsider, sending frantic messages and calling her relentlessly. Ellie stood firm, not knowing her decision would seal her fate. Detectives began to probe Thomas's alibi. He claimed he had been at home all day on May 3rd, grappling with the breakup and other personal issues. He even said he had attended school later to speak with a counselor about his emotional struggles. At first glance, his calm demeanor and seemingly cooperative attitude gave little cause for suspicion. But the cracks in his story soon began to show. Forensic analysis of Ellie's phone revealed a chilling discrepancy. A text message she had supposedly sent to a friend that morning, canceling plans to be picked up for school, had been sent hours after her estimated time of death. Investigators suspected the killer had used Ellie's fingerprint to unlock her phone and send the message, buying themselves time. As detectives examined Thomas's phone records, their suspicions deepened. GPS data showed that while his phone had been at home earlier that morning, it began moving at 10:50 a.m., heading toward Cal, where Ellie lived. By 10:53 a.m., it pinged near her house and remained there for over an hour. At 11:51 a.m., the phone started moving again, this time returning to Thomas's home. The timeline was damning, but the most incriminating evidence came from surveillance footage. A silver Ford Focus, registered to Thomas's parents, was captured traveling toward Calne during the critical time frame. The same car was later seen returning shortly after noon. Investigators confronted Thomas with these findings, and his composure began to unravel. Fresh scratches on his face and neck, which he had earlier dismissed as accidental, drew renewed scrutiny. The medical examiner's findings confirmed that Ellie had fought desperately against her attacker, leaving defensive wounds that matched the pattern of the marks on Thomas. The final piece of damning evidence came during a search of a wooded area near his home. Hidden under the undergrowth, officers discovered a black trash bag containing bloodied rags, a stained apron, and other items used to clean up the crime scene. Ellie's blood was identified on the rags, and fibers matched those found in the Gould family kitchen. Forensics also revealed Thomas's clothes, recovered from his washing machine, still carried traces of Ellie's blood despite his efforts to destroy the evidence. By now, the trail of guilt was undeniable. Thomas Griffiths, the seemingly quiet, unassuming teenager, had been unmasked as a cold-blooded killer. Yet one haunting question lingered. Why? What could drive someone so young to commit such an unspeakable act of violence? Investigators would soon learn the unsettling truth, one that would shake the small community to its core. The evidence against Thomas Griffiths was undeniable, but the horrifying details of Ellie Gould's final moments remained elusive. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a shocking and deliberate plan began to emerge, one that revealed a level of cruelty no one had anticipated. On May 3rd, after being dropped off at school by his mother, Thomas never went inside. Instead, he waited until she was out of sight, then walked to a nearby bus stop and returned home. From there, he took the family's silver Ford Focus and drove to Ellie's house in Calne. It was just before 11 a.m., a time when Ellie was alone, unsuspecting, and vulnerable. Ellie's friends later speculated that she had let Thomas in willingly, perhaps believing he wanted closure after their breakup. But what unfolded in that house was anything but a civil conversation. The precise details of their confrontation remain locked in Thomas's mind, but the forensic evidence told a harrowing story. The medical examiner confirmed that Thomas had first tried to strangle Ellie. The scratches on his face and neck were the desperate marks of her fight for survival, her nails digging into his skin in a last attempt to escape. But Thomas didn't stop. When his hands failed to end her life, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her 13 times, most of the wounds concentrated around her neck. The violence was monstrous, far beyond what anyone could fathom. Ellie's defensive wounds painted her final moments in heartbreaking detail. Her hands were deeply cut as she tried to fend off the blade, fighting with every ounce of strength. But in the end, the attack left her lifeless on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath her. The crime scene bore the full force of Thomas's savagery, walls streaked with blood and tiles stained with the evidence of her struggle. Thomas's actions didn't stop at murder. For nearly an hour, he remained in the house attempting to clean up the scene. He used rags to wipe away blood but left smudges in his frantic attempt to erase what he had done. He washed his sneakers in the sink, leaving traces of Ellie's blood behind. Then, in a calculated move, he placed the knife in Ellie's hand, trying to stage the scene to look like a suicide. One of the most chilling details came to light when Ellie's friend shared a text message she had received that morning, supposedly from Ellie, canceling plans to go to school. Investigators concluded that the message had been sent hours after Ellie's death. Thomas had used her fingerprint to unlock her phone and send the text, buying himself time before anyone would come looking for her. After leaving the house, Thomas drove to a wooded area near his home. There, he discarded a black trash bag filled with bloodied rags, a stained apron, and other items he had used in his frantic cleanup. Returning home, he threw his clothes into the washing machine, hoping to erase the last traces of his crime. Then, remarkably composed, he prepared to carry on as though nothing had happened. Later that day, Thomas attended school. He played the role of a heartbroken teenager, telling friends and even the school nurse about his struggles with the breakup. He cried, expressed his emotional turmoil, and carefully planted the seeds of an alibi, hoping to shift suspicion away from himself. But Thomas underestimated the detectives working the case. Surveillance footage, GPS data, and forensic analysis quickly unraveled his lies. By the evening of May 3rd, police officers arrived at his home. Calm and confident, Thomas greeted them, answering their questions with practiced ease. Yet when they brought up the scratches on his face and the damning GPS evidence, cracks began to form in his composure. The arrest came swiftly. At just 17 years old, Thomas Griffiths was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. During questioning, he maintained his innocence, claiming he had been at home all day. But the weight of evidence, GPS logs, surveillance footage, and forensic findings left no room for doubt. His carefully constructed lies collapsed under scrutiny. The small community of Kalna was left in shock. How could someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, commit an act of such cold-blooded brutality? What drove Thomas to turn on the girl he once claimed to love? These unanswered questions hung heavy in the air as the case moved toward trial. The prosecution vowed to prove that Thomas's actions were far from impulsive. The ferocity of the attack, his attempts to stage a suicide, and the lengths he went to cover his tracks painted a chilling picture of premeditation. As the nation watched, one question lingered. Would justice be served for Ellie Gould? The answers awaited in a courtroom that would lay bare the horrifying truth. The trial of Thomas Griffiths began on August 29, 2019, just 4 months after Ellie Gould's life was so brutally taken. The courtroom was filled with reporters, legal experts, and members of the public, all grappling with one question. How could a teenager commit such an unspeakable act? Ellie's family sat quietly, their faces etched with grief, bracing themselves to relive the horror of her final moments through the cold precision of legal arguments. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case. They described Thomas as a young man consumed by jealousy and rage after Ellie ended their relationship. He wasn't a victim of circumstance, they argued, but a calculated killer who meticulously planned his crime. Using surveillance footage, GPS data, and forensic evidence, they reconstructed the grim sequence of events leading to Ellie's murder. Forensic experts revealed the harrowing truth. Thomas had attempted to strangle Ellie in a fit of rage. When she fought back, he resorted to using a kitchen knife. The stab wounds, 13 in total, most concentrated around her neck, were described in excruciating detail, leaving no doubt about the brutality of the attack. The prosecution argued that this wasn't a moment of uncontrolled emotion, but a deliberate attempt to punish Ellie for rejecting him. The defense painted a different picture. While they admitted Thomas had killed Ellie, They claimed it wasn't premeditated. According to their version, he had gone to her house that morning to talk things through, but a heated argument spiraled out of control. They portrayed Thomas as a troubled teenager, overwhelmed by emotions, someone who made a tragic mistake rather than a cold-blooded killer. Thomas himself took the stand, delivering what seemed like a carefully rehearsed statement. His voice trembled as he claimed to have little memory of the attack, saying he had been blinded by emotion and couldn't recall the details. Addressing Ellie's family directly, he apologized, expressing deep regret. To some, his demeanor seemed genuine. To others, it felt like a calculated attempt to win sympathy. The prosecution swiftly dismantled his defense. They pointed to his actions after the murder, the meticulous cleanup, the staged suicide, the fake text message sent from Ellie's phone, and the discarded evidence. These weren't the impulsive decisions of someone overcome by emotion, they were deliberate moves to cover his tracks. One of the trial's most haunting moments came when forensic experts described Ellie's defensive wounds. The deep cuts on her hands and arms showed how fiercely she fought for her life. The scratches on Thomas's face, which he initially claimed were self-inflicted, were confirmed to match Ellie's desperate attempts to defend herself. She hadn't gone quietly. She had fought until the very end. Testimonies from Ellie's friends and family painted a clear picture of Thomas's controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to her death. He demanded constant attention and grew angry when Ellie set boundaries. One friend shared a chilling memory of Ellie confiding that she was scared of how Thomas might react to their breakup. Tragically, her fears proved justified. By the time closing arguments were made, the evidence against Thomas was overwhelming. The prosecution urged the jury to recognize the crime for what it was, a premeditated act of violence carried out with chilling precision. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing Thomas's age and emotional state as mitigating factors. On November 8, 2019, the verdict was delivered. Thomas Griffiths was found guilty of murder. Acknowledging the extreme brutality of the crime, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years and 6 months. For Ellie's family, the sentence was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the thought of Thomas potentially walking free in his early 30s felt like an insult to the enormity of his crime. The public reaction was swift and furious. Social media erupted with outrage as people questioned how a premeditated murder could result in such a lenient sentence. Petitions circulated, demanding stricter penalties for juvenile offenders and greater recognition of the dangers of domestic violence, even among teenagers. Ellie's parents, Matt and Carol Gould, channeled their grief into action. Determined to prevent other families from enduring such pain, they launched a campaign to reform sentencing laws for young offenders. Their efforts led to the introduction of Ellie's Law in 2021, which allowed for harsher sentences for juvenile murderers. Yet, the new legislation came too late for their daughter's case, leaving them with the bittersweet knowledge that their loss had sparked change but couldn't undo the past. As the trial ended and the world moved on, the memory of Ellie Gould lingered in the small town of Calne. A bright and compassionate teenager, she had been taken in an act of unimaginable cruelty. Her story became a symbol of the devastating consequences of unchecked anger and possessiveness, a haunting reminder that darkness can hide behind even the most ordinary facades. The legacy of Ellie Gould. Even after the trial concluded and Thomas Griffiths began his life sentence, the shockwaves of Ellie Gould's murder reverberated through her family, friends, and the community of Calne. The pain of her loss remained a constant, a wound that no passage of time could fully heal. Yet Matt and Carol Gould refused to let their daughter's death be remembered solely as a tragedy. They committed themselves to ensuring Ellie's life and legacy brought about lasting change. Ellie had been a bright and determined young woman with her whole future ahead of her. She dreamed of studying psychology and joining the mounted police, blending her love of helping others with her passion for horses. To her family, she wasn't just their daughter, she was their light, filling their home with joy and laughter. Her brutal murder not only devastated them but also fueled their resolve to prevent another family from enduring such unbearable pain. The public outcry following the trial extended beyond grief. It became a rallying point for justice. The sentence handed down to Thomas Griffiths, life imprisonment with a minimum term of just 12 years and 6 months, sparked anger across the nation. How could someone who committed such a premeditated, brutal act potentially walk free before the age of 35? For Ellie's loved ones and countless others, the sentence felt like a betrayal of her memory and a glaring flaw in the justice system. Determined to make a difference, Ellie's parents began campaigning to reform laws governing juvenile offenders. They argued that the age of a perpetrator should never outweigh the gravity of the crime. Their advocacy gained widespread support, driven by public outrage and the undeniable need for reform. In 2021, their efforts bore fruit with the introduction of Ellie's Law. Ellie's Law enabled courts to impose longer sentences on juvenile murderers, extending the maximum term to 27 years without parole for crimes involving extreme violence or premeditation. It was a victory, though bittersweet. While the law promised greater justice for future victims, it couldn't retroactively apply to Thomas Griffiths. For Matt and Carol, it was a painful reminder that while their daughter's death had spurred progress, it couldn't change what had already been done. Beyond their legal campaign, the Goulds worked tirelessly to preserve Ellie's legacy through her love of horses. They organized events inviting children to ride Ellie's ponies, sharing her passion with a new generation. For Matt and Carol, these gatherings offered a glimmer of solace. Watching children experience the joy Ellie once found helped ease their heartbreak, keeping her spirit alive in the community she adored. Ellie's story became more than a tale of loss. It became a call to action. Schools and organizations began emphasizing the importance of recognizing controlling behavior and setting boundaries in relationships. Her friends, many of whom had seen Thomas's possessiveness firsthand, spoke out as advocates for healthy, respectful relationships. For them, Ellie's death was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked anger and manipulation can become. Yet, despite these efforts, the shadow of Thomas Griffith's eventual release lingered. By the time he becomes eligible for parole in his early 30s, he could re-enter society as a free man. For Ellie's family, this possibility was a chilling reminder of the justice system's limitations. Matt Gould voiced his fears, describing Thomas as a psychopath and expressing deep concern about the danger he might still pose. Ellie Gould's case continues to resonate as a cautionary tale. It highlights the devastating consequences of unchecked possessiveness and the dangers that can hide even in seemingly safe relationships. For the residents of Calney, it was a stark reminder that evil can arise from the most unexpected places, forever altering the lives it touches. Today, Ellie's parents remain steadfast in their mission to honor her memory. Through their advocacy, community events, and public appearances, they ensure that Ellie's name is never forgotten. They have transformed their grief into a powerful force for change, creating a legacy that reflects the strength, determination, and resilience their daughter embodied. Ellie Gould's story is not just a tragedy. It's a testament to a family's enduring love and a community's unyielding demand for justice. Her life, though tragically cut short, continues to inspire others to fight for a safer, more compassionate world, one where no young person has to fear the people they trust most. If this story moved you, please consider supporting campaigns that advocate for victims of domestic violence and relationship abuse. Like, share, and comment to help keep Ellie's memory alive and support the fight for justice and change. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and educate.